The land was silent, but not in peace. It was the hush of fear, the stillness of defeat. Israel had no king, and every heart was ruled by dread. The heavens felt distant, the prophets had grown quiet, and darkness moved freely through the valleys. But then, a voice pierced the silence. It wasn't a warrior's shout or a priest's chant. It came from beneath a palm tree, carried on the breath of a woman whose soul burned with divine fire. Her name was Deborah. She didn't rise with violence. She rose with vision. And when she spoke, the earth remembered what it meant to tremble before God. She didn't just lead armies, she awakened them. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was laced with thunder. Every word she uttered struck like lightning into the hearts of men, because this wasn't her voice, it was the voice of the Lord, wrapped in flesh, carried by fire, impossible to ignore. In a time when men ruled with swords and silence, a woman stepped into the battlefield without armor. Her weapon was not steel, but revelation. Her name was Deborah, and her presence disturbed the hierarchy, not because she shouted louder, but because her authority came from a throne higher than Israel's. The nation was crippled by fear. Israel had fallen under oppression for 20 years, their cries rising with no answer. Warriors cowered, judges failed. Yet beneath a single palm tree in Ephraim, Deborah rose not by force, but by divine appointment. She judged not from a throne, but from a tree of wisdom. She had no army, no title of general, but people came from all tribes to hear her, not because they trusted her power, but because they sensed she walked with someone greater. She didn't command by commandment, she commanded by presence. Her authority was not taught, it was felt. While men sharpened blades, Deborah sharpened her spirit. Her clarity came not from politics, but from stillness, from waiting, from watching. She was not just a judge, she was a seer, and what she saw, others could not ignore, because when a woman sees with the eyes of God, no enemy remains hidden. Israel had forgotten what prophecy sounded like, but Deborah's words were not suggestions, they were decrees, not molded by fear, but forged by flame. Every verdict she gave cut through compromise. Every sentence she spoke cracked the veil of fear wide open. She did not ask for respect. She carried it. She wasn't chosen by Israel. She was raised by heaven. In a world where strength was defined by muscle and dominance, Deborah redefined it by obedience and clarity. She became a paradox, soft in form, fierce in spirit, the kind of warrior hell cannot predict. When women were told to stay silent, she sang. When leaders hesitated, she moved. Deborah never sought the spotlight, it found her. Because light always finds the lamp God ignites. She was not breaking tradition. She was fulfilling prophecy. And the earth had to make room for the voice that came next. Deborah never shouted to be heard. She didn't need to. Her words carried a strange authority, as if the air itself bent to listen. When she spoke, it wasn't just sound, it was impact. Her voice didn't echo. It struck, not with volume, but with weight. Every word carried the scent of heaven and the sting of truth. It wasn't her wisdom that drew the people. It was something deeper, something divine. The elders of Israel came not just for advice, but to receive orders that felt etched in flame. Deborah didn't offer opinion. She spoke with certainty, as if her mouth was a vessel for something ancient and holy. When she opened her lips, it was as if the veil between heaven and earth thinned. The Spirit of the Lord surged through her, bypassing human thought. Her voice became the thunder in the quiet, the match to dry wood. She didn't deliver messages. She became the message, a walking, burning decree. Even the warriors' men seasoned in blood and blade lowered their heads when she spoke, not because she was loud, but because her presence carried fire. Her silence was heavier than most men's roars. Her gaze alone could halt rebellion, not by threat, but by revelation. There was no ritual, no road, no temple wall to amplify her authority, just a woman, just a voice. But it shook foundations, because the Lord didn't anoint her to impress, He anointed her to disrupt, to cut through the noise of compromise, and her voice became the sword no enemy could parry. In the secret place, where others only found shadows, Deborah found fire. She didn't ask for it. She was consumed by it. Her dreams burned with visions. Her bones quaked with divine urgency. She didn't fear speaking, she feared staying silent. For silence, to her, meant disobedience to the God who called her. Her voice wasn't poetic. It wasn't crafted. It was forged in prayer, in pain, in persistent presence before God. That's why it carried such weight. That's why it broke delay and summoned action. Deborah's voice didn't merely instruct, it activated. It moved people into position. Those who heard her didn't leave the same. Some walked away offended. Some walked away in awe. But none walked away untouched. Her words lingered. They clung to bones. They disrupted sleep. Because when God speaks through a person, His voice doesn't fade, it follows. She wasn't chosen for her beauty, not for her lineage, not for popularity. She was chosen because her spirit could host fire and not be consumed, because her lips were clean enough to carry holy flame. Deborah wasn't just a prophetess, she was a voice on fire. Barak was a warrior by every definition, strong, respected, and trained in the heat of battle. But when Deborah summoned him with a word from the Lord, he didn't run toward the fight. He hesitated, not because of cowardice, but because of the weight of who had spoken. This was not an invitation, it was a divine command. She told him plainly, "Has not the Lord, the God of Israel, commanded you?" The question struck deeper than any spear. Deborah wasn't suggesting a strategy, she was delivering heaven's marching orders. And in that moment, Barak stood face to face, not with Deborah's voice, but with God's urgency. Barak's response was strange for a soldier. "If you go with me, I'll go." He wasn't doubting the battle, he was doubting himself. It wasn't the size of Sisera's army that troubled him. It was the magnitude of the moment. He needed Deborah not as a general, but as a prophet to anchor his faith. And Deborah, unwavering, said yes. But she warned him, the honor will not be yours. God will deliver Sisera into the hands of a woman. This wasn't a punishment, it was a divine realignment. In heaven's kingdom, obedience outweighs reputation, and the glory follows the willing. Barak still led the army. He still fought. But the prophecy shifted the spotlight. God was making a statement. Victory doesn't always come through the expected vessel. Sometimes it flows through those whom the world considers unqualified, so no one can steal the glory from him. This wasn't just a test for Barak, it was a test for every man watching. Could they follow when the command came through a woman? Could they submit to heaven's voice? No matter the vessel, Deborah wasn't just leading a battle. She was reshaping the battlefield of human pride. Barak's faith grew as Deborah stood beside him. Her fire became his confidence, and when the trumpet sounded, he didn't hesitate anymore. He charged, not in his own strength, but in alignment with prophecy. Obedience became his weapon, and surrender became his strategy. This battle wasn't won with numbers or chariots, it was won the moment Barak obeyed the voice of fire. Because God's victory never starts on the battlefield. It starts in the heart that says yes, even when afraid. and Barak's yes unlocked a chain reaction that would shake kingdoms. The battlefield was set. Sisera's army stood like iron walls, his 900 chariots gleaming beneath the sun. Israel's warriors looked like dust in comparison. But Deborah stood still, unshaken. She turned to Barak and declared, "This is the day the Lord has given Sisera into your hands, not will give, but has given." The battle was already won in the spirit. At her word, heaven moved. Dark clouds gathered without warning. Thunder cracked like the voice of God. The Kishon River swelled beyond its banks. The ground beneath Sisera's chariots turned to mud. What was once their strength became their prison. Chariots stuck, horses panicked, soldiers fell into chaos. Barak charged from Mount Tabor, not as a man facing an army, but as a man following prophecy. Every step he took echoed the weight of Deborah's declaration. The battle belonged to the Lord, and heaven fought beside them. Lightning split the sky, screams filled the valley. But Israel pressed forward not by force, but by fire. Sisera, once feared, fled on foot like a coward. The mighty commander ran from a people he once mocked. That's what happens when God enters a battle. He doesn't just defeat your enemy, he dismantles their pride. No sword of man could have caused such confusion. This was the fury of divine justice. The soldiers of Israel saw it clearly. They weren't winning by strength. They were watching God move. It wasn't strategy, it was surrender that won the day. When heaven goes before you, even the most invincible strongholds melt like wax. Deborah's voice had summoned more than courage, it had awakened the storm. The battlefield became a stage for divine wrath. Nature itself turned traitor to Sisera. The skies wept, the earth groaned, the river swallowed. All of creation bent toward one verdict. God was judging through wind, rain, and prophecy. This wasn't war, this was reckoning. Israel didn't need superior weapons. They needed alignment. Deborah had already seen the outcome, and heaven simply followed her vision. The timing was perfect, the setup divine. The enemy's confidence crumbled like brittle stone under the hammer of God's decree. What was impossible became inevitable. This victory was a mirror, a revelation of how God fights. He doesn't just overthrow armies, he overturns systems of fear, dependence, and oppression. Deborah had announced the outcome long before swords clashed. Because when God speaks through fire, the result is never a question, it's a countdown. And as the dust settled, the people of Israel realized they hadn't just won a war. They had witnessed God move through a woman's voice, through a people's obedience, and through a storm that answered prophecy. The battlefield now lay silent, but it whispered the fear of the Lord to every soul who passed by. While swords clashed and chariots drowned, another battlefield awaited far from the noise inside a quiet tent. Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, was no soldier. She had no title, no prophecy spoken over her. Yet heaven had marked her. Because sometimes the most decisive victories happen in the shadows. Sisera fled to her tent, desperate and disarmed. He thought he had found refuge. He had no idea he had walked straight into divine justice. Jael greeted him calmly, gave him milk, covered him with a blanket, not as a gesture of peace but as a trap set by God himself. While Sisera lay sleeping, exhausted from running from the wrath of heaven, Jael moved with holy precision. She took a tent peg and a hammer, not weapons of war, but tools of survival, and drove it through his skull. The enemy who terrorized Israel was brought down not by a soldier, but by a woman in silence. Her act was brutal. Yes, but it was sacred. She wasn't acting out of impulse. She was executing a prophecy. Deborah had declared that a woman would receive the glory. Jael became the unexpected fire, the second flame heaven ignited to complete the judgment. No one saw Jael coming. She had no army behind her, no divine visions spoken aloud, but her obedience in obscurity echoed louder than the clash of swords. She acted without fear, without hesitation, because when God stirs the heart, even a housewife becomes a hammer in his hand. Sisera died not in glory but in disgrace, his head pinned to the earth, his pride crushed by someone he would never have seen as a threat. That is how God works. He flips the script, he elevates the unlikely, and he lets his fire fall where the world least expects it. Jael's tent became an altar, a place where justice kissed obedience, where prophecy found its punctuation. No crowd cheered, no trumpet sounded. But heaven recorded every moment. In that act, a nation's fear was buried, and a woman's courage became eternal fire. Jael was not trained in battle, but she was trained in stillness, in boldness, in trust. She knew when to act, she knew when to strike, and she knew whose side she was on. Her victory was not just over Sisera, it was over timidity, over silence, over being underestimated. When Barak arrived and found Sisera dead in her tent, the story was sealed. Deborah's prophecy was fulfilled. Two women had carried the fire. One spoke it, one drove it, and together they delivered a nation not with armies, but with obedience, not with glory-seeking, but with surrender. The fire of God does not discriminate. It falls on the willing. Jael's name may not appear often in sermons, but in heaven, she is honored as the woman who said yes in secret and changed history. Because sometimes, the fiercest flames burn where no one is watching. When the dust settled and Sisera lay dead, Deborah didn't return to silence. She lifted her voice not to boast, but to testify. Her song wasn't gentle, it was prophetic. It recounted judgment and justice, obedience and downfall. It was less a melody and more a declaration, a spiritual earthquake sung in rhythm. This was not a lullaby for victors. It was a war cry written in poetry. Deborah and Barak sang together, but the fire behind the words was unmistakably divine. They sang of how leaders arose, how the people offered themselves willingly, how God thundered from heaven and how the earth trembled. The song told the truth, that history forgets that the stars fought from heaven, that rivers turned against chariots, that heaven itself joined the battle. It wasn't military might, it was divine disruption. Her lyrics were timestamps of supernatural intervention, each stanza a scar carved into time. Deborah didn't just chronicle events, she interpreted them through heaven's lens. Her song exposed cowardice and celebrated courage. She named names, she honored the tribes who came and rebuked those who stayed behind. Her voice cut across national lines with surgical precision. This wasn't political, it was prophetic. She wasn't just singing about men and moments, she was unveiling motives and movements. Her song was the courtroom of heaven, with each verse rendering judgment. And once a song like that is sung, it never truly fades. It lingers. It haunts. In her song, she exalted Jael, calling her most blessed among women for striking Sisera down. She painted vivid images not to entertain, but to brand remembrance into Israel's soul. She wanted generations to remember the victory came not by strength alone, but by surrender to God's voice. Deborah ended her song with a fiery plea, "Let all your enemies perish, O Lord, but let those who love you be like the sun when it rises in its strength." It wasn't just a wish, it was a warning, because when the Son of God rises, It consumes everything in its path that opposes him. Her song became scripture, immortalized, not because of its beauty, but because of its fire. It was a song that reminded Israel who fought for them and what happens when they forget. A call to remain aligned, to never fear when heaven speaks, even if the voice comes through unexpected lips. What Deborah sang that day wasn't just for the past. It echoes forward into generations, into hearts, into battles yet to be fought. Her voice still trembles in the air, calling for remembrance, for righteousness, for readiness. Because heaven's songs are never just sung, they are sent. Deborah's story is not sealed in the past. It is a template, a blueprint, a prophecy in disguise. Because the voice that once thundered beneath the palm tree is awakening again, not in one woman, but in many. The fire she carried has not faded, it has multiplied. In these final days, when truth is twisted and fear is sold as wisdom, God is once again raising up voices that don't fit the mold. Prophets without platforms, warriors without swords, women and men who burn with the same flame that once made a nation tremble at Deborah's word. These modern Deborahs are rising from silence, from obscurity, from prayer closets and shattered places. They are not famous, but they are marked. They do not seek glory, but they carry it. And when they speak, the atmosphere shifts because it is not them speaking. It is fire. This fire is not political, it is not cultural, it is eternal. It cuts through confusion like lightning through storm clouds. It exposes the false and awakens the sleeping. It is not polite, but it is pure, and it is searching for mouths willing to carry it. Deborah's mantle is not about gender. It is about obedience. Heaven is looking for those who will say yes before knowing the cost, who will speak when it's unpopular, who will stand when others bow, because the battles of the last days will not be won by strategy, but by alignment. The world is preparing for wars of flesh and politics, but heaven is preparing for a war of voices, not shouting matches but piercing truths, words that convict, comfort, and call forth. The Deborahs rising now are not here to fit in, they are here to break the silence. Some will come with songs, some will come with visions, others will carry justice in their steps and intercession in their bones. But all will carry one thing, fire. Not the fire of anger or fame, but the holy fire that once ignited a palm tree into a throne room of command. Do not look for them on stages. Look for them in the stillness, in the wilderness, in the places where fear once reigned, and now trembling prayers rise. They will be misunderstood, resisted, even silenced, but not extinguished, because the fire in them was not lit by man. It came from the throne, and when they speak, the heavens will once again move, earthquakes will follow obedience, prophecies will unlock battles already won. The Deborahs of this age will not be many, but they will be enough, because God does not need numbers. He needs flames that say yes. You were not born in this generation by accident. The fire that burned in Deborah is still moving across the earth, searching for hearts it can ignite. You don't need a title, a pulpit, or a crown. You only need surrender, because the voice of God still chooses the unexpected, and heaven is still whispering. Arise. Some will hear this message and move on, but some, the marked ones, will feel a stirring deep in their bones, a pull toward purpose, a fire that refuses to die down. If you are one of them, then know this: your silence is dangerous. Your voice is needed. You were created to carry flame. The battles ahead will not be won by the loudest, but by the most obedient. God is raising a remnant who will speak when it costs everything, who will carry heaven's fire into dry places. If this resonates with your spirit, you are not alone. You are part of something ancient, holy, and unstoppable. Comment below, "I carry the fire of Deborah." Subscribe to stay aligned with heaven's call. Share this video to awaken another voice that hell hopes will stay silent. The Deborahs are not coming. They're already here. And you might be one of them.